Detectives in Syracuse have issued a warrant for the arrest of Demetrius Hackett.
They had information that the Hackett family believed that Chance was responsible for the death of Demetrius' older brother, Pierre, back in August 2011. Which would lead them to also believe that Chance's murder was perhaps a retaliation. When detectives cannot find Demetrius, they worry that perhaps he might have fled the state. So they go door to door in different neighborhoods in Syracuse trying to find him. Despite the fact that detectives kept hearing that Demetrius was a good kid, he was still considered armed and dangerous, and their job was to get him off the streets as soon as possible.
We just lost a life, and we have to get justice for this life.
Finally, on April 9th, 2012, more than 2 weeks after Chance's murder, the warrant squad tracks down Demetrius Hackett.
So 18 days after the homicide, Demetrius Hackett, who's been in hiding, suddenly is arrested. Demetrius is arrested and charged with the murder of Chance Gathers.
When they arrested Demetrius and charged him, and I found out like the motive was because he thought Chance killed his brother, it was just a real sad situation. 2 guys dead and 1 in jail.
During his interrogation, Demetrius denies any involvement in the murder of Chance Gathers.
Syracuse police are grilling Demetrius about this incident. Demetrius isn't budging. Demetrius isn't going to confess to this crime.
Even without a confession or any physical evidence connecting him to the crime, Demetrius Hackett is charged with second-degree murder.
When Demetrius is arraigned at the courthouse the following day, his mother and father waste no time pleading their son's innocence to the media that gathered outside of the courthouse.
They allege that Chance Gathers had been leveling threats at their family in the months since Pierre's murder.
The Hackett family say that Chance has been terrorizing them for months as they're mourning the death of their loved one. They say he's making their life a living hell on the streets of Syracuse, New York.
Investigators stay focused, knowing they must tighten their case against Demetrius. And there is one item in evidence that could give them what they need.
The baseball cap found at Chance's murder scene dropped by the killer. The DNA lab was able to pull a DNA sample from the baseball cap.
They want to test that hat he left at the scene for DNA. It's a risky move because, yes, DNA is extremely powerful evidence. That can cut both ways because as sure as a DNA match could convict Demetrius, if there's no match, that could be an immediate, huge piece of evidence to just let Demetrius get an acquittal.
Investigators are willing to take the risk, but Demetrius isn't.
Demetrius was asked to provide DNA sample at his own will, but he refused.
Investigators in Syracuse are desperate to strengthen the case against 19-year-old Demetrius Hackett in the shooting death of his alleged enemy, Chance Gathers.
So the police and prosecutors, they think they have their man in Demetrius Hackett. They want to test that hat left at the scene for DNA.
Demetrius, while in custody, was asked to provide DNA sample at his own will, but he refused. So prosecutors went in front of the judge in May 2012 and asked that he was court-ordered to provide DNA sample.
If there's no match, Demetrius is probably going to walk from this crime because what's tying him to this murder? Nothing, other than the fact that his name has come up. And without DNA evidence, I don't think you have a murder case against Demetrius Hackett. The DNA is going to tell the tale Is Demetrius involved in this crime or is he not?
A judge signs off on the subpoena. Investigators collect a saliva sample from Demetrius, and then they wait.
The DNA testing comes back, and yes, it's a match. That was the hat being worn by Demetrius Hackett. His DNA is now on it, and what's more, witnesses saw him wearing it. This is really hard now for Demetrius to say he was not involved. You can now put Demetrius Hackett at that crime scene, and you could put him there wearing that hat.
Demetrius and his attorneys maintain his innocence despite the new evidence.
His lawyers are starting to consider a new tactic. Demetrius was under an extreme emotional distress at the time he pulled the trigger. This means we're no longer gonna deny that he shot Chance, but we're gonna show you why he did it.
Extreme emotional distress is a response to a traumatic event where you have a loss of self-control, intense, overwhelming emotions in response to, the traumatic event. Demetrius had good grades. He didn't have a criminal record. This was a traumatic event for him, which may have caused him, to be dealing with extreme emotional distress. This is why his lawyer wanted to argue this for his case.
Prosecutors must consider that this argument could work.
Who's to say that a jury may look at him and say, oh man, we're gonna let this kid get acquitted because he was obviously in a horrible situation. The prosecution knows that, and Demetrius and his attorneys know that. But they also know that if the jury comes back and says, no, it's murder, he's looking at a life sentence.
Prosecutors pursue a plea. On August 30th, 2013, almost a year and a half after Chance's murder, Demetrius Hackett pleads guilty to a reduced charge of first-degree manslaughter.
Demetrius has pled guilty to first-degree manslaughter. He's gonna get a chance to finally speak about what happened on the day that he shot and killed Chance Gathers. Demetrius tells the judge this was a lose-lose situation. Chance Gathers was terrorizing my family. If I didn't take this into my own hands, I'd be dead. He felt it was a kill or be killed type situation and that he made the decision to take out Chance Gathers before Chance Gathers could take out him and members of his family.
Demetrius said in court that he felt like pretty much he had no choice. He said that Chance was threatening him and his family.
The judge responds.
So the judge tells Demetrius that there was no criminal case against Chance Gathers. The police hadn't charged him with that. So even if everybody on the street and in the family knew or heavily suspected Chance killed Pierre, you can't kill someone just because you believe they killed your brother. The court system is not going to justify an eye for an eye. They're just not going to do it.
The judge sentences Demetrius Hackett to 20 years at the Wind Correctional Facility in upstate New York. He'll be eligible for parole in 2029.
At the end of the day, this is a very tragic story about retribution and how the cycle of violence just leads to prison and more tragedy. It certainly does in this case. At the end of the day, Chance Gathers is dead, and Demetrius Hackett is going to be in a prison for the next 20 years. Demetrius wasn't a bad kid. Demetrius was on the right track. The only thing that happened to Demetrius was his family became victim to the cycle of violence in this country. And unfortunately, Demetrius decided to handle it himself.
In this case, one man's struggle with grief became another family's permanent loss.
The changes he made right before he died, I'd rather have had that chance just for a little while than the old Chance, because I know for sure he's in heaven. At some point, you do have to break the cycle. Somebody has to do it. I feel like it's only us that can change the culture of the streets and the way that we conduct ourselves. That whole eye for an eye leaves us all blind.
ma'am, I got to tell you, your son is gone. I said, gone? He said, he got killed. And I fell to my knees.
In front of you. But what if, somewhere along the way, you take a wrong turn? Your relationship veers wildly off course. And it turns out your final destination isn't happily ever after. It's deception, heartbreak, and some hard time behind bars. It's Labor Day weekend in El Monte, California. As locals and vacationers alike enjoy the weather, Deputy Sheriff John Marquez is finishing his usual patrol. He comes across a car in a shopping center parking lot that seems out of place.
He decides to pull into the parking lot and run the plate. He's registered to a car that is listed as wanted and armed and dangerous.
The vehicle appears empty. But as Deputy Marquez approaches it, all hell breaks loose.
A man pops up, notices the deputy, and starts firing shots.
He fires at the officer, hitting him in the face, chest, and arm. The officer returning fire at the same time.
Deputy Marquez eventually takes cover behind the door of his squad car. The shooter flees his vehicle and makes his way behind a nearby building, accompanied by a young woman.
They were both running. They are able to get out of his eye shot, and the deputy at that point has been calling him back up.
When you make a call like that, officer shot, everyone stops in law enforcement.
Dozens of officers are now on the hunt for the shooter and his female companion. But who are they? And why shoot the officer? As detectives dig deeper, they'll find themselves on a wild ride that spans the California coast and uncovers just how far one woman was willing to go for love. Born and raised in California, Tania Washington was a beautiful model on the rise.
Modeling was like her love. Tania's been doing photo shoots since I can remember. She had like little end jobs, but her main thing was becoming a model.
She wanted to be a model, and she was well on her way.
Tania's physical beauty was matched by her generous, kind-hearted spirit.
Tania is a loving person. She would give you the shirt off her back.
She had a lot of friends. She had a lot of people who liked to be around her. She was always the one that everybody expected nothing but the best.
In between modeling gigs, Tania also studied film and photography in community college.
She wanted to get into filming. Anything that had to do with production, she was into.
At home, Tania was a total daddy's girl.
She loved her father. He couldn't really do too much wrong.
They talked about everything. They were very close.
But when Tania was just 22, tragedy struck.
She was like, Auntie, I can't reach my dad. I keep calling him. He's never not answered me.
Tania's worst fear was realized when she found her father dead in his study.
He did have lupus. It was one of those bad situations.
He died suddenly, and unfortunately, she was the one that found him. That's traumatizing.
It was horrible. It was more so like someone shut her light off, and it put her in a dark place.
She was lost and empty. It was a sadness, a cloud over her.
To escape her grief, Tania threw herself into her modeling career and her schoolwork. And as fate would have it, one spring day in 2010, she met 21-year-old Darnell Washington while on campus.
Darnell is young, he's tall, he's handsome.
She's in the throes of grieving the one secure base in her life, and then suddenly Darnell comes along and is very understanding. He's a great listener, he's very supportive.
Darnell was kind of the male in her life that replaced her father. I was happy that something was positive after what just happened.
Tania felt Darnell was heaven sent. When she was with him, all the pain and heartbreak just seemed to fade away. Over the next few months, Tania moved on from the nightmare of her father's death to what seemed like a dream with Darnell.
Took her on picnics, did things that made her feel good. He just struck her as this really sensitive, caring person, and that's exactly what she needed at that particular point in her life.
I never seen her just really, really into somebody, and she really liked him.
She was drawn in by his charm, his good looks.
He swept her off her feet. She was experiencing something that she never had before.
Their relationship was rock solid and moving fast, speeding right down the aisle into wedded bliss.
They got married in a matter of months.
The wedding was nice, in the chapel in Beverly Hills.
After tying the knot, Tania and Darnell moved in together, and everything seemed perfect.
She loved him. She wanted the passion and the excitement. She was so into this guy.
She seemed really happy. They had a loving relationship.
She thinks of him as a sensitive, capable, caring human being.
Tania's unwavering love for Darnell enabled her to look past some of his flaws, including his troubled past.
Darnell was abandoned by his mom and dad at an early age. He ended up doing time in a juvenile facility, and the day he turned 18 was transferred to a state prison.
She knew that he had been in jail. She was probably giving him a chance. Everybody has a past.
Friends and family worried that Darnell's criminal record could cause trouble for Tania. But she was all in, for better or worse.
You feel like you're in love and you lost your father, and then something else comes that makes you feel happy. You feel like you don't want nobody to take that from you.
Family had some misgivings about him, trying to say, you sure this is the right guy? People sort of quickly got the message that she was going to do what she was going to do.
But just what was Tania willing to do for her man? And just how dangerous was her husband? The answer to those questions would come 2 years later in El Monte, California, when detectives arrive on the scene of a shootout involving one of their own. Deputy John Marquez has been ambushed by a young man in a parked car and shot 3 times.
Witnesses say that they saw a black male shoot at the deputy, and after he finished shooting the deputy, he grabbed a black female and fled the scene with her.
Deputy Marquez is rushed to the hospital, barely clinging to life. While Marquez is en route, investigators with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department get to work.
The police ran the plates and discovered that the vehicle had been used in an escape, and the suspects were tagged as armed and dangerous.
Police know they need to locate the 2 suspects as soon as possible, before someone else gets hurt.
Chase was on for the perpetrators. The entire force is out looking for him now.
And they had no idea how dangerous the people were.
Los Angeles County detectives are investigating the shooting of Deputy John Marquez, who is currently in a fight for his life at a local hospital.
The shooter fled the scene, but he left behind his car. And when they investigated the car, they found that the car was connected to a recent jailbreak in Southern California.
The escapee is none other than Darnell Washington. He broke out of the Glen Helen Rehabilitation Detention Center in San Bernardino County just 5 days before the shooting.
Washington was convicted of an armed robbery of a jewelry store. He made off with over $400,000 worth of jewelry, and he was awaiting sentencing.
He decided that he didn't want to face the music and started plotting an escape.
He had his mind made up, not do the time for the crime. He was getting out to do whatever else he wanted to do.
Investigators learned that on August 28th, 5 days before the shooting in El Monte, Darnell made a call from a phone in the jailhouse yard. Moments later, he dropped the receiver, made a run for it, and scaled a 14-foot barrier. The deputy's shooting was the first sign of Darnell since his escape. Detectives look over the incident report in order to better understand how Darnell was able to get away scot-free.
Every inmate is assigned a PIN number so they can make their phone calls, and all of those phone calls are recorded, then often monitored.
Darnell is able to convince another inmate to let him use his phone code. The jail authorities don't realize that Darnell that's making these phone calls. They assume it's under this other inmate.
Every one of Darnell's phone calls were made to one person and one person alone, his 25-year-old wife, Tania.
She would always be stressful after the call. Her attitude changed.
I don't know exactly what he was asking her to do, but I knew what good. Because she started being really, really secretive when I would ask her.
Based on the recent events, it appears Darnell and Tania had been hatching a plan to break Darnell out of jail.
Tania is not a criminal. She is completely out of her depth with this, so Darnell guides her through the entire process.
Whether it was through manipulation or something else, he definitely had her in his pocket.
Darnell was able to convince Tania to buy a good car and to wait for him outside of the county jail. Tania learned when the guards changed shifts to help prepare to get him out of there.
He convinced her to help him by saying, if you really love me, you're going to do this for the relationship.
Detectives believe that once Darnell was on the other side of the fence, he made a beeline to Tania's car, climbed in, and the couple sped off.
The way Darnell escaped out of the county jail was extremely rare. Broad daylight, jumping over barbed wire fences, pretty daring and shocking that he was able to actually get away.
For the next 5 days, Darnell and Tania were free together, on the open road.
Breaking your husband out of jail has that romantic feel to it. Daring, fun, exciting, and scary at the same time.
Somewhere along the way, the young lovers acquired a shotgun.
The kind of rational things that we usually use to keep us on the straight and narrow absolutely don't exist for them at that moment.
Although multiple law enforcement agencies had been on the hunt for Darnell, he and Tania were able to avoid the authorities. That is until the shootout with Deputy Marquez.
I was really kind of impressed that they eluded law enforcement as long as they did, because that was a brazen breakout.
Detectives know Darnell Washington is armed and willing to risk it all to avoid capture. But the million-dollar question is, will Tania Washington be willing to do the same?
They were all about each other's worlds, especially Tania. I think she was just all cut up in Darnell's image and who he was and just intoxicated.
Authorities in Southern California are on the hunt for escaped felon Darnell Washington and his accomplice wife, Tania.
He robbed the jewelry store, and then she helped him escape from jail.
At this point, everybody's looking for Tania and Darnell.
The couple is also wanted in connection to the shooting of Deputy John Marquez, who remains hospitalized in critical condition.
They have no idea where they are, so investigators start questioning her friends and her family. They want to get some information about her marriage with Darnell.
And they said we have reasons to believe that she helped him escape from jail. It's like a part of me died.
Once they collect themselves, Tania's family explains they've had misgivings about Darnell from the moment he and Tania started seeing each other.
She would have never did anything like this. She's fabulous until she met him. That's when it changed. The dark cloud came over her and everything changed. Something about him didn't sit right with me. Boy, he's crazy. Literally, something is wrong with him.
He just broke her down, made her a weak person, something that she never was.
Tania's family tells detectives that just a month into their marriage, Darnell became overly possessive.
It got to the point where she couldn't make certain decisions without talking to him.
She used to be a very sociable person, and suddenly she was unavailable.
She started to be a little distant. You hardly ever saw her. She wouldn't visit as much. I would ask her, "Are you okay?" And she'd say, "Yes, Auntie, I'm fine." I'm like, "But you don't look okay. You don't seem okay."
It was all about making him happy so he wouldn't get upset.
In truth, Darnell was using more than just emotional manipulation to get Tania to do his bidding.
It was physically abusive and psychologically abusive.
He was controlling. He knew that she was very vulnerable, and he knew how to manipulate her because he knew that she was missing something in her life.
She had so much going for herself. I felt like he manipulated her and pressured her to do what she did.
Tania's family says that the more Darnell mistreated Tania, the more devoted she became.
She had that mind frame where she wanted to do to make him happy because he made her feel like that was her responsibility.
Tania's family states that once Darnell was thrown in jail for the jewelry heist, her loyalty to him went into overdrive.
It's hard to tell if she really thought he was guilty, but she wanted to stand by his side. She loved him to pieces.
Darnell would say, "I'm in here because I'm trying to give you this life and make you happy." So she started feeling like it was her fault that he was in there, and she had to make something right. She couldn't lose the only other man that she believed loved her.
Less than 24 hours after the shooting, investigators received some good news. Deputy Marquez's condition has stabilized, and doctors expect he will make a full recovery. But there's little time to celebrate. In the hours since the shooting, reports of attempted carjackings across Los Angeles County have skyrocketed.
People got guns pointed at them and either gave up their car and they drove it like a block or refused to give it up, and the perpetrators just ran away.
Witnesses say that there was a black male with a black female accomplice who was attempting to carjack cars with a shotgun. And those descriptions both matched Tania and Darnell.
The next morning, detectives arrive at the home of Amaya Connor, one of the victims of the armed carjackings. Amaya quickly confirms what investigators already suspect, that the people who attacked her were Darnell and Tania Washington.
I guarantee they probably thought, "We gotta get another car." At this stage, he's a big-time accomplice.
But what will be this ride-or-die couple's next move? And will there be more bloodshed before they're brought to justice? California detectives are on the hunt for Tania Washington and her escaped convict husband, Darnell. The couple is suspected in the shooting of Officer John Marquez, who will miraculously survive his injuries. Tania's friends and family have long had their misgivings about Darnell, but they're shocked to learn of the lengths she went to in order to help him break out of jail.
Tania never been influenced by any man. Never been swayed to do anything that she did not want to do. That's not Tania. Tania never did nothing that was criminal. But I know how she felt about him.
Detectives now believe the Washingtons are also to blame for a slew of armed carjackings in the area. A suspicion that's confirmed by one of their victims, Amaya Connor, who offers up a harrowing account of what happened.
They approached her with a shotgun, and they wanted to get her keys.
He goes up and tells her to give him the keys to the car. The woman realizes that her brother and sister are in the house, doesn't want them to get hurt.
She panicked because he had a gun and she knew that he was going to be serious about using it. The couple took her keys, sped off in her car.
After speaking with Amaya Connor, detectives put out a bolo for her stolen vehicle.
So after the carjacking and the officer shooting, law enforcement would create a be on the lookout, saying the person is known to be armed and dangerous.
But despite detectives' best efforts, the trail grows cold.
They somehow get away from this huge police detail, and then they just disappear.
The entire Southern California area, is on the lookout for these two individuals.
I just could not sleep, wondering where she was. Is she okay? I can't get to her. I can't talk to her. Just cry and just pray that she doesn't end up dead. I just wanted her home. I just wanted her to be safe.
I was scared if she would have answered the phone. I would just try to plead with her, trying to figure out what she's getting herself into and the consequences.
Weeks pass with no sign of Tania and Darnell. Finally, on October 5th, more than a month after the shooting of Deputy Marquez, surveillance video at a hardware store in Pinole, a town some 400 miles from El Monte, suggests the Washingtons have finally resurfaced.
They're acting suspicious, both looking around a lot. Kind of indicators that, these people are looking to steal.
They're in the aisle, and he's trying to cover her while she tries to steal a hacksaw, and she slips it in her bag. But then they get confronted by the store security. They managed to break free from the scuffle, and they escaped in a silver car.
The video surveillance, along with the eyewitness account, confirms it. The Washingtons have made their way to Northern California.
Police have no idea why a couple would go to this much trouble to steal a $5 hacksaw, and they decide to put out a be on the lookout for that vehicle.
But before the bolo can generate any new leads, the case takes a dark and sinister turn. Later that night, less than 10 miles away in the neighboring city of Hercules, detectives are responding to a 911 call at the home of Kelvin and Susie Coe. 55-year-old Susie has been found on the floor of her home, stabbed and beaten to death in what appears to be an armed robbery.
There's no way you can ready yourself for something like that.
Susie's injuries are horrific.
She was beat with the butt of that shotgun. And some of those stab wounds, it was like they hit the clavicle bone and moved it to a softer part of her body so he could make sure that she was going to be killed.
She was stabbed 21 times. The aftermath was one of the most devastating crime scenes that I've ever seen.
Could Tania and Darnell be responsible for this heinous attack? Given the proximity to the hardware store and the fact that Susie Coe appeared to have been beaten with the butt of a shotgun, the connection seems probable. Detectives speak to Susie's heartbroken husband, Kelvin, about the moments leading up to the crime.
Mr. Cole was at an airport waiting for Susie to pick him up. And when she didn't, he got really concerned.
They called and asked his neighbor to go check on his wife. His neighbor ended up going over to the home and looked through a window, and she saw Mrs. Coe laying on the ground, not moving, with blood around her.
Kelvin can't imagine why anyone would want to harm his wife.
Susie Coe, she's a retired teacher. She's the mother of 4, grandkids. She's beloved in the community.
The last time that Miss Coe was seen alive was around 7:30 p.m. that night. She had walked next door to a neighbor's house and dropped off some roses.
That's just the kind of heart that she had. She was just a quiet, well-mannered older lady, one of the darlings of the neighborhood.
The suspects ended up killing Miss Coe and then taking her purse, some small items around the house, and the keys to the car.
If you just take a step back, you can really see the layers of how unnecessary this was. They didn't need to assault her to get her car. Definitely didn't need to kill her to get her car.
They immediately put out a bolo on the vehicle. The license plates are registered as a vehicle that's been involved in a murder.
Now, the race is on to capture Tania and Darnell before they kill again.
From a manhunt to murder, these people are damn near America's Most Wanted at this point.
Residents in Northern California's Contra Costa County are reeling from the brutal murder of 55-year-old Susie Coe.
Anytime you have someone that's well established in the community and they're murdered in such a violent way, creates shockwaves through the community.
For this neighborhood, it was one of the most devastating things that have occurred. This just doesn't happen. And not to Mrs. Coe, not for a lady who was just kind to everyone.
There's nothing that Susie could have done differently that day to avoid what happened to her. I think that's the thing that's disturbing and scary. This could have happened to anybody.
Detectives believe the killers are married couple Darnell and Tania Washington.
They got into the shootout with that deputy, committed carjackings, armed robberies, and then stabbed a completely innocent woman.
They were now being called the 2012 Bonnie and Clyde.
Detectives put out a bolo for Susie's car. They need to find the Washingtons before they harm someone else. 5 days later, on October 10th, investigators catch a break, but not in California.
800 miles north, Seattle, Tacoma area, this officer happens to see the car.
It's parked in an empty lot and matches the description of Susie Coe's vehicle.
The stakes have totally gone up, and the officers know that this is the key piece of evidence that they've been looking for.
The officer approaches the vehicle with caution. He sees a couple inside, clearly in the throes of passion.
They were having sex in the backseat of the car.
It's unbelievable that they were discovered in the stolen vehicle, having sex, just for all the world to see. They freak out, and they scramble to put themselves together.
Recognizing the Washingtons from the nationwide bolo that went out a few days earlier, the officer keeps his service weapon trained on the two lovers.
They're not going to go down without a fight. So Tania jumps in the front seat and starts to try and drive away.
Luckily, the Washingtons don't get far.
Officers managed to stop the car about a half-mile away using a pit maneuver where one car pulls in front of the suspect's vehicle and another car pulls up along the side of it.
A second cop car pulls up, and then a third cop car, and they basically corral him in.
Even though he and Tania are surrounded on all sides, Darnell refuses to come quietly.
Darnell is fighting. They had to tase him to calm him down and to apprehend him.
As for Tania, she seems overwhelmed with emotion.
She was distraught, totally discombobulated. I mean, this was her worst nightmare.
Darnell and Tania Washington are placed in police custody and transported to the King County Jail.
Both had warrants out for their arrest from the escape and the carjackings, the attempted murder of the police officer, the murder of Miss Coe.
Word of the arrests travels swiftly back to Tania's family in Los Angeles.
I just cannot wrap my head around it.
I was just kind of speechless. Couldn't comprehend it with my best friend.
All these things transpired because that one fateful decision to drive up there and let this fool hop over the gate and get in the car with you.
What's surprising to me is just how long that they were able to elude capture and the lengths that they were willing to go in order to get away.
It was anything to survive. Whatever they needed at that time, they made sure they got it.
The couple is transported back to Northern California, where detectives attempt to elicit confessions from them. First up is Darnell. But just minutes into the interview, it's clear he has no intention of playing ball.
This meant life in prison, no matter what he did. He had committed a murder. He knew that this was his death sentence.
With Darnell refusing to cooperate, investigators turned to Tania.
She had no criminal record. There's chances she would talk.
But like her husband, Tania remains tight-lipped.
She loved him, and she wanted to be the one to stick by him, do thick and thin.
There's just a whole storm of things that are occurring with her. They probably just came to a head, and she decided at that moment to make that choice to stick with him.
Investigators have no choice but to charge Tania and Darnell with murder, robbery, carjacking, and burglary. It will now be up to a judge and jury to determine their fate. And when push comes to shove, will the couple stick together, or will one of them finally turn on the other?
Sometime when you unleash a monster, you can't put it back in the cage. They're already loose.
Darnell and Tania Washington have been charged with a murderous crime spree that kept the entire state of California on pins and needles for nearly 6 weeks. But before their trials get underway, Tania's defense team pleads with the judge in a preliminary hearing. They claim that their client is a victim herself.
Tania's defense team argued that she had been abused by Darnell and that she was an unwilling participant in these crimes.
She was manipulated by him. She tried to run, and he threatened her a few times to kill her.
She's been in an abusive relationship, and that means that there's a really powerful bond that forms there.
The judge, however, rules that Tania must face her crimes in a trial like her husband, which forces Tania to make a life or death choice.
Before Darnell went to trial in 2016, Tania took a plea deal for 23 years in state prison.
Tania pleads no contest to manslaughter, carjacking, second-degree robbery, and residential robbery. And in return, she doesn't have to testify against her husband, Darnell.
On July 22, 2016, the trial for Darnell Washington begins. Prosecutors lay out their case. They take jurors on a wild ride, beginning with Darnell's daring escape from a Southern California detention center.
It took some planning, and it was quite brazen, but his mindset was to escape.
And Tania was there waiting for him.
He said, I'm coming out one way or the other, but I want you to be there with a car and help me get away.
After 5 days on the run, the couple then got into a shooting altercation with Deputy John Marquez in El Monte.
So they pull up to a shopping center. Tania got out, and Darnell's lying down in the back seat with a shotgun. This deputy starts running the plate number on their car, and Darnell jumps up and starts firing shots.
This guy was willing to shoot his way out of the situation, and Marquez was lucky to survive.
Prosecutors allege that once the Washingtons fled the scene, they went on an armed carjacking spree up the coast, which included the assault on Amaya Connor.
She's terrified that Darnell has a gun. She gave him her keys, and he got in the car and sped away.
In regards to Tania, this is her ride or die, and she chose to stick with him.
The Washingtons then burglarized the store in Pinole.
Darnell and Tania had stolen a hacksaw and fled in the silver car. They knew they had been seen on camera, so they ditched the car.
They manipulated the barrel, then they sawed the wooden handle off. He wanted to conceal the gun.
Prosecutors theorized that the couple then found Susie Coe's home and slipped inside. Tania positioned herself as the lookout, while Darnell demanded Susie hand over her car keys.
He asked her for the keys to her car in the same manner that he's done to numerous people at this point, armed with a gun.
When Susie won't give up her keys, Darnell stabs her 21 times.
Darnell had fired a shotgun round. Neighbors would have heard. So stabbing and a beating, while maybe loud within the home, isn't going to be heard outside the walls of that home.
Darnell and Tania then slipped away under the cover of darkness in Susie Coe's car.
They end up heading north up into the state of Washington.
After laying out the timeline of Tania and Darnell's crime spree, prosecutors present a laundry list of incriminating evidence seized from the couple at the time of their arrest.
When police captured Darnell and Tania in Seattle, they are in Susie's car. And inside the car, not only do they have some of Susie's belongings, but they also find a knife and Darnell's sawed-off shotgun. Forensics later found that there was DNA matching Susie.
When it's the defense's turn, they don't deny their client's guilt on many of the charges. But in a surprising turn of events, Darnell flips the script on Tania.
His defense was that Tania did it, saying that throughout this whole crime spree, Darnell was cool, calm, and calculating, but Tania was freaked out and panicked. Just attacked Susie against his wishes, and that she was the lone killer and he had nothing to do with it.
Darnell's defense is a complete shock to everyone familiar with the case, especially Tania and her loved ones.
It's not her personality. That's not in her spirit. She would never stab somebody. She would never kill anybody. No, she wouldn't.
Darnell's claims are stunning, but the jury isn't buying them. On September 28, 2016, the jury finds Darnell Washington guilty.
Darnell was convicted of the first-degree murder and then given the death penalty.
He's sitting on death row right now and plotting his next escape, I'm sure.
The verdict and sentencing brings some closure to the families of Darnell and Tania's victims. However, the pain will last a lifetime.
Justice was served, but justice can only go so far. The Coe family and everybody who loves Susie Coe is always going to have a hole in their heart.
They've lost a dear loved one and they'll never be able to see her again. It's heartbreaking.
Really a needless and senseless crime. There was no reason to murder her.
For Tania, she has 23 years behind bars to think about what she did and why.
The tragedy for Tania in this is she's going to spend the prime of her life in prison.
While she's in custody, maybe she will realize that the price that she was willing to pay to be on this crime spree with Darnell, it just wasn't worth it.
She's never gonna experience being a mother. All these years she's wasted in jail.
She was just willing to trust him, to trust that he had their best interests in mind. So she deferred to him and let him lead, and she followed.
I just feel like he took her life. She had so much going for herself. I just feel like she's been robbed. She's not an evil person. She did this for her man because she loved him. I know that for sure.
Traveling love's unpredictable path requires a true partnership, a driver and a navigator. When one partner becomes reckless behind the wheel, a single wrong turn can send you down a dead-end path where you end up separated forever.
There were only 3 people in the room when Jam Master Jay was killed: Jay, Lydia, and Tony.
Even when people have valuable information that can help solve a crime, sometimes they're not confident that they will be kept safe.
There was definitely outcry about the case. How come it's not solved yet? Eventually, everything in the dark comes to light.
In this second episode of a 2-part special, witnesses unveil a reprisal for a deal gone wrong.
They were working with Jam Master Jay was because they were close to him. His childhood friend and his godson.
He had felt that he had been wronged by Jason and that this was vengeance for that.
You cannot be successful in the drug trade without being ruthless. And a message needed to be sent.
And we dig into the decades-long quest to bring justice for a tragic chapter in hip-hop history.
Their strengths in this case were also their weaknesses.
Lydia's fear in the courtroom was palpable.
Anyone would be afraid of making an enemy out of a killer.
On October 30th, 2002, hip-hop legend Jason Mizell, a.k.a. Jam Master Jay, is shot and killed in the 24/7 studio in Queens.
There were only 3 people in the room when Jam Master Jay was killed: Jay, Lydia, and Tony. Lydia and Tony later tell us that 2 men stormed into the studio. One of these men shot Jay in the back of the head, killing him instantly on the spot.
But in the aftermath of the shooting, neither Lydia nor Tony identifies the suspects.
It was complicated because of the fear factor with Lydia and Tony. I knew it was going to be difficult.
Even when people have valuable information that can help solve a crime, sometimes they're distrustful of law enforcement, or they don't feel comfortable that law enforcement can actually keep them safe.
I would think anyone would be afraid of making an enemy out of a killer.
Several months later, Lydia finally comes forward, picking one of the men out of a photo lineup.
She knew one of the men involved in this crime. She knew Ronald, and Ronald was the person that was holding her down. But she didn't know the shooter. She didn't know the person who was responsible for murdering Jay.
Everybody knew Ronald Washington. They knew the type of person he was and what he was about.
They were well aware of his drug activity. Everyone in the community knew about it. And they knew that him and Jay grew up together.
Investigators suspect that Jay was also involved with narcotics.
There was a long piece that came out in Playboy magazine that was going through a complete detailed account of the fact that Jam Master Jay was involved with drug activity.
The author interviewed Ronald in prison, and what Ronald said was that this whole murder was because it was a drug deal gone bad.
But the exact connection between Jay, Ronald Washington, and the illegal drug scene remains unclear.
Ronald Washington's name remained at the forefront of the investigation. Investigators and prosecutors believed he was involved, but lacked the evidence to prove it. The identity of the actual shooter remained a mystery.
You had people that were very protective of Jason Mizell and his reputation, and they felt putting him in the narcotics industry at all was going to harm his reputation. and they didn't want to disrespect him after he had passed.
Washington was in jail on another unrelated case, and he was doing time. They had time on their side.
But the months turn into years, leaving Jay's friends, family, and fans frustrated.
There was definitely outcry about the case. How come it's not solved yet? You gotta remember, Jay got killed in 2002. Tupac was killed in the 90s and Biggie was killed in the 90s. So between 2003, 2004 to the 18, other rappers were involved in other homicides. So the public was like, every time something came up about a rap murder, how come these cases are not solved?
Obviously, you want justice for it. You know, I wanted justice for my friend, but I didn't want to just blame somebody who didn't do it. So to me, it was necessary to wait this long because eventually everything in the dark comes to light.
He was like a dad to me. So it was like, I lost my dad, and then my grandmother lost her son, my mother lost her brother, you know, so it's rough. It was very hard to deal with. So TJ and Jesse and Jason Jr., they grow up without a dad.
As the case remains unsolved, Jay's legacy takes shape.
In 2009, Run DMC were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They were the first hip-hop group to ever get that honor.
When they got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it just sucked because Jay wasn't there. Jay would have loved it. He would have bragged about it a little bit and in a playing manner, because he wasn't a type of guy that thought he was better than anyone, but he would joke and say, you know, yeah, we in the Hall of Fame. You know what I mean? Like he would be very happy and very proud.
Hollis, Queens, like most parts of New York City, has become gentrified and a lot of the crime has reduced, thankfully. They cleaned up the area. But where Jam Master Jay is, there's a mural of him there. They renamed the street after him. They just really have celebrated who he was in that particular community, which he was a big deal as Jam Master Jay and Hollis, Queens goes together.
In addition to the many accolades, there was a lot more to his legacy, to include Scratch Academy, which would further the progression of DJing in general amongst future DJs and current and present DJs.
DJing, again, is an exclusive club. And before Scratch Academy, DJs were super secretive about their techniques. Only people in your camp would learn that trick that you knew how to do. People that you trusted, your friends. But here's this school that is doing the opposite. They're teaching people, whoever wants to walk in and learn how to do these secret techniques that only DJs like myself knew how to do. DJing, hip-hop culture in general was a way out for kids like me, a way out of getting into crime, a way out of ending up in jail or getting into fights. It's like you were using your energy in this positive way, in this healthy way, in this creative way, and then experiencing yourself and then making a name for yourself around the neighborhood.
Then in 2016, the case gets fresh eyes. Federal investigators step in under the belief that Jay's murder was connected to a drug deal.
In order for it to be a federal crime, it has to have some other nexus. Well, one of the nexuses is it was a murder committed in furtherance of a drug transaction.
The investigation is no longer a local police matter. It's now taken over by the EDNY, the Eastern District of New York.
Tens of thousands of people likely were wondering, how could they never solve this? You know, if that could happen to Jam Master Jay, a very famous person who everybody knows, if Jam Master Jay's murder could go unpunished, what expectation do I have of justice for me? We needed to respond. And we need people to have faith in the Justice Department. And we need perpetrators to know that the passage of time provides no escape or relief from you when you commit a crime of this nature. We will never give up.
Around the same time, a new tip comes in from Randy Allen.
Randy was in the studio that day, but he wasn't in the room when Jam Master Jay was killed. But what we do know is that Randy has a story to tell. He has some information that he needs to give the investigators.
Apparently, Randy Allen starts making phone calls. And one of the people he calls is Tony Rincon. And it's in 2016, I believe, that Tony Rincon tells Randy Allen that it was Carl Jordan who was the shooter. Carl Jordan was Jason Mizell's, or Jam Master Jay's, godson. There was no blood relation, but he was the godson of Jason Mizell, Jam Master Jay.
Carl Jordan Jr. He is the other assailant that was with Ronald Washington at the night when Jay was shot in the music studio.
Randy reports that he confirmed the ID with Lydia.
At about that same time, he calls his sister Lydia High, who also says that Carl Jordan was the shooter. Now, this is 14, 15 years after the actual shooting takes place. And I believe he contacted the authorities. Carl was never pulled in and interviewed. He was not on their radar before then.
Federal investigators immediately contact Tony.
Tony talks to detectives also, and Tony verifies the story that Randy told the detectives earlier, that Carl is that second person that came into the studio that day and is our shooter.
He knew it was him. As soon as he seen him, he knew who Jordan Jr. was from the neighborhood. He knew it was Jay's godson. He knew exactly who he was.
He claimed that he was afraid of Carl Jordan, and now he was no longer afraid. He wanted to do the right thing.
A decade after the death of Jam Master Jay, witness Tony Rincon finally agrees to tell investigators what he saw in the 24/7 recording studio in October 2002.
His story changes. He says that he does know the identity of the two men who came into the studio that night. They were Ronald Washington and Jordan. Jordan was Jam Master Jay's godson, and Washington was a good friend of Jam Master Jay and had grew up in the neighborhood, so he recognized them immediately. He said that he didn't come forward because he was scared, but he finally decided to tell the truth because he just felt like Jam Master Jay's family deserved answers.
Many years over this investigation, detectives heard many people named and many people identified as the possible shooter, but they had never heard Carl's name. Carl is a new name that's come up in this investigation, so detectives know they have to look into this.
There wasn't a lot of evidence connecting Carl Jordan to the studio on October 30th, 2002. In fact, until 2017, there was no evidence connecting him to that studio that evening. There was nothing forensic, not a fingerprint, not a hair, no DNA, nothing that connected him to that studio that evening.
When police follow up with Lydia, she falls short of naming Jordan as the shooter.
The police went back and talked to Lydia High again. This time, she says that Ronald Washington was the man who held her down at gunpoint. And then she also describes the gunman who shot Jam Master Jay. She says she had never seen him before, but that he was a light-skinned male with a neck tattoo.
Lydia did not know Carl, so she would not have recognized him the way she recognized Ronald, because Ronald was a childhood friend, so she had known Ronald for a long time. But she didn't know Carl. She saw the shooter and could tell us what he looked like. When she gave this description, it actually matched Carl.
After more than 10 years, the investigation takes a small step forward. But this time, there is one big difference.
Involvement of the federal government in Jam Master Jay's murder helped immensely. And the reason that it helps in these cases is because the government has more tools, more at their disposal to use.
Those prosecutors are able to go across state lines and look into all the leads that they have been hearing about Jam Master Jay's involvement in drug activity.
The federal government interviewed all the witnesses that NYPD had talked to, and also new witnesses that were brought forward.
Another witness, Serubian Bastian, tells investigators that he was Jordan's roommate when the murders took place.
He tells the police that on 2 occasions at least, he's overheard him bragging about being the person who killed Jam Master Jay.
He said that at one point he overheard Jordan telling his girlfriend on the phone, "I'll do you like I did Jay." And on another occasion, they were in the car and he said that if Jay was still alive, he would kill him again.
That happens all the time with people. So many years have passed, so they probably felt that they're not going to catch us, they're not going to get us. So they just felt comfortable talking to other people about what they did. And sometimes it's bragging, you know, letting people know, you know, I'm the guy that killed Jam Master Jay. You don't want to mess with him. You know, so people think it's a badge of honor sometimes.
Investigators comb through Jordan's criminal record, where they make another potential connection between Jordan and his Godfather shooting.
So in 2003, Jordan was arrested. During that time, he was searched and police recovered .40 caliber bullets and a .40 caliber pistol. When the .40 caliber bullets were examined, they realized that they were the exact same type of ammunition that was found at the crime scene where Jam Master Jay was killed.
The casings are the same primer type, font, texing, and spacing on the head stamp.
That didn't necessarily prove that he was the killer, but it did prove that at that time, he was in possession of the same exact type of ammunition.
So detectives now know that they have 2 suspects. They have Ronald Washington and Carl Jordan, but they don't have any evidence. We don't have proof yet to be able to charge these suspects with this murder.
Investigators go back to the blue hat found at the crime scene. With over a decade having passed since it was tested for DNA, they run it again.
They recover a blue hat at the crime scene that didn't belong to any of the witnesses. They're planning to do a DNA analysis and hope that it matches either Washington or Carl Jordan Jr.
Detectives figure out that if they can match the hat to either one of these suspects, then that could break their case wide open.
The situations that she put us in, just wicked.
All new.
The other thing that happens is that with the passage of time, the perception of witnesses can change in a couple of important ways. You worry about memories fading over time, but you also may benefit from the maturity of witnesses over time and a diminished fear. The fear factors is important, but if you look at the history of the United States Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York, the office has a very proud and strong history of prosecuting the highest profile cases in the United States involving some of the most dangerous defendants. So the office comes with the credibility and institutional experience to know how to work with witnesses in a dangerous environment, facing potentially dangerous defendants.
Next Wednesday,
there's a young black man fighting for his life.
Payback.
She wanted revenge.
Is back.
He felt that he'd been cut out of a deal and that was unacceptable.
Don't miss all new Payback next Wednesday at 9 on TV One.
Over a decade after Jam Master Jay was gunned down, federal investigators retest a potentially key piece of evidence found at the scene.
There was this blue hat that was recovered near the body of Jam Master Jay. That hat was tested back in 2003 to see if there was DNA. And at that time, there was no positive match. But now detectives take a second look.
From 2002, more samples hit CODIS. And so there was a wider pool to analyze or to compare to. That's why they did it.
The federal government decided to retest the blue hat for DNA. And when they test that hat, they run the DNA sample through a database called CODIS. And when it runs through CODIS, they get a hit.
the test results come back, they find out that it wasn't a match to Ronald Washington or Carl Jordan Jr. It was a third suspect. The DNA came back to a third person that wasn't even on their radar.
So what you expect in an investigation is that you're going to have twists and turns. But what you don't expect is this huge plot twist. Now, who is this guy? And is he friends with Washington or Jordan? And what did he play in this murder?
As investigators try to understand the connection between Jordan, Washington, and the new suspect, they take a closer look at allegations Jay was involved in the drug trade.
When you're involved in the drug trade, it's a dangerous business. So there's got to be a need there. And usually that need is financial. Either you need money or you're really seeking that money at a whole nother level. So a logical step now is that we're going to have to look at Jay's financials.
They learned that Mizell was in deep financial trouble at the time of his death. He owed the IRS with penalties and interests that had built up over time.
He had took a lot of money and helped a lot of people and gave out money. A lot of these rappers, and even ball players, athletes do this. They give out money, buy houses and cars, and then they realize, oh, wow, that money went fast. You're supposed to be in a savings program. And these guys aren't in a 401k.
There are a lot of people who depended on Jason Mizell. According to the government, people depended on him financially, and he felt this pressure to provide, and that pressure led him to financial difficulties.
Jay had a family, his own family. He had 3 children, a wife, he had a sister. He has family which he considered his community, the Hollis Queens community. Any person or people or need that was out there, he was going to try his best to financially help that person or people. That's just what his spirit was. He was always a giving individual, so hands were always out for Jam Master Jay, and he wasn't shy to give, even if he didn't have it. He'll find a way to give it.
Did Jay turn to selling drugs to keep himself and everyone around him afloat?
Now you have to figure out what's the connection, why these suspects wanted to execute Jam Master Jay.
Police circled back to Ronald Washington because they were well aware of his drug activity. Everyone in the community knew about it.
Ronald Washington was in jail for a series of robberies. He did a bunch of commercial robberies, and the federal government already arrested him, and they charged him with those robberies. However, now, he was sentenced to certain years in jail, and his time was about to come up, where he was about to be released.
It's still not enough for an arrest, but investigators are ready to confront Washington in person.
On April 16, 2019, investigators interview Washington at a prison in Kentucky.
The federal investigators decide to go speak to Washington in prison. And when they speak to him, he starts off immediately saying, I think I might need a lawyer for this.
It's a weird thing to say. Either you're making a joke or you're implying your guilt, your involvement in this murder. But either way, you agreed to talk to police, so we're ready to listen.
He talks to them anyway. And what he talks to them about is that there was a drug deal, a big drug deal that Jam Master Jay was involved in with a dealer down in Maryland, and that Washington was a part of that drug deal.
Washington admits that he was in on a deal that Mizell was brokering to bring in 10 kilos of cocaine from California to Baltimore.
Washington also lets the investigators know that Jordan was also supposed to be a part of the drug deal.
Jay went out to get the 10 kilos and get them on consignment. Consignment is that you'll get the 10 kilos and then you'll pay us later. It's like product now and pay later. 10 kilos are probably something about $400, almost $500,000 of drug money. So that was a lot of money.
Federal investigators looking into the death of Jam Master Jay interview suspect Ronald Washington in prison.
He admits that 3 of them, including Jay, were involved in a drug deal. And the result of this drug deal would have brought them a lot of money at the end.
The reason that Washington and Jordan were working with Jam Master Jay was because they were close to him. Washington was his childhood friend, and they grew up together in the same neighborhood. So he knew Washington, and Jordan was his godson.
Ronald really didn't have a lot going for him, but Jay was determined to help him. And so Jam Master Jay and Ronald and 2 other individuals drove down to Baltimore to find a guy who ran the drug business in Baltimore and to get his permission to allow Ronald to distribute that cocaine in Baltimore on Jam Master Jay's behalf. Ronald insisted to Jay that this guy really hated him, and they did not get along because of some prior incident, and that he didn't think it was a good idea for him to actually go face-to-face with the guy. And if Jay was able to work it out, then he would go meet him, but he really thought the guy hated him, and he didn't think that they should meet. And so Jay agreed, and he dropped Ronald off at a motel. And then Jay and his driver continued on to meet with this drug dealer who controlled Baltimore. And his reaction to Jay's request to allow Ronald to distribute drugs in Baltimore was, if I see him, I will kill him on sight. I don't want to ever see him in Baltimore.
The guy in Baltimore was like, you messing with him, Washington? Like, I don't want that guy pushing my drugs in the neighborhood. He's not a good person. I don't trust him, never did, never will. If he's not cut out, I'm not giving you anything. So Jam Master Jay had to deliver this news to his business partners.
Washington was out, so that meant Jordan was out also.
There was no way around it. Jam Master Jay didn't have the pull. He was only the middleman. That was his role.
Ronald wasn't upset with this. He knew that guy wasn't going to work with him, so they just went back to New York and they forgot about the drug deal.
But investigators believe Washington was more upset than he is letting on. In fact, they believe they may have just uncovered his motive.
You cannot be successful in the drug trade without being ruthless to a degree. Those social and legal boundaries are more easily crossed, unfortunately, than most people would expect. And that's why victims are often completely surprised, because they think to themselves, it's me. It's you and me. We know each other. We have a relationship. You've had dinner in my house, for example. You've met my family. How could you be doing this to me? And the response is a cold, hard truth, which is essentially, this is business. He felt that he'd been cut out of a deal, somehow cheated, and that was unacceptable to him, and a message needed to be sent.
Jam Master Jay's murder was set up by Washington and Jordan as revenge for him cutting them out of the deal in Maryland.
4 years after taking over the case, federal prosecutors are confident enough to make a move.
On August 16, 2020, Carl Jordan Jr. is finally arrested at 36 years old. 56-year-old Ronald Washington, who is serving a prison sentence for a robbery, is also charged. Both men are charged with murder while narcotics trafficking. Carl Jordan Jr. is charged with additional counts of narcotics distribution.
They had to move fast because they didn't want to arrest Jordan and then have Washington be released. So they tied them both into the murder and indicted them both. Bingo, now they're remanded to jail. They're not going anywhere.
News of the arrests and the alleged motive is a mixed bag for Jay's family.
We were not friends. Growing up, I knew them. I have absolutely no clue on what the motive was for Jordan Jr. and Washington to kill my uncle. Because I don't know Jay to be a drug dealer, right? I don't know Jay to be involved with drugs. I don't know that.
So when you heard that, Jam Master Jay's death was attributed to anything drug-related, it was a shock. Knowing him personally, him being involved in anything drug-related was an absolute shock to me.
But the arrest resurfaced it all, back to the top, and it kind of got pushed back in my face like, this is the beginning of it. So really, it was just the beginning of the end.
As prosecutors prepare their case, biggest weakness is in plain sight.
DNA was found at the crime scene from a third individual.
They knew that the defense counsel would use the DNA that was found in the blue hat to create reasonable doubt with the jury.
The situations that she put us in, just wicked.
All new Fatal Attraction, Monday at
During the time when Jam Master Jay was murdered, a lot of things were changing during that time, and they had ushered in a new brand of rap music called gangster rap. So you heard gangster rap on the radio now. And once they started to play gangster rap on the radio, then they started not to play the other rap music that preceded gangster rap. I think oftentimes, you know, coming from successful situations, successful music groups, when your circumstances change and you're going through a transitional period, it can be difficult to sustain yourself.
By February of 2024, prosecutors are finally ready to take Carl Jordan Jr. and Ronald Washington to trial for the 2002 shooting of Jason Mizell, aka Jam Master Jay.
It took the full 4 years to prepare for the trial. It was delayed because of motion practice. It was delayed because of COVID.
Both Washington and Jordan Jr. face up to life in prison. The death penalty was not presented for this case, which is an opportunity in the federal courts. But for here, the biggest and the largest sentence you could have for first-degree murder is life without the possibility of parole.
In their opening arguments, the prosecution lays out what they allege happened on October 30th, 2002.
The prosecution's theory in their opening statement was that Jason Mizell was part of a drug trafficking network between New York and Baltimore. That he brought Jordan and Ronald Washington into a deal in Baltimore and then out of the blue cut them out. And that was the motive for the shooting.
So, according to the prosecution, Jam Master Jay's murder was set up by Washington and Jordan as revenge for him cutting them out of the deal in Maryland. They explained to the jury that they came to the studio that night together and that they went upstairs.
Jordan walked in, Jay stood up, Jordan screamed, and that's when he pulled out the .40 caliber gun and fired a single shot to Jay's head. Jay died instantly. A second shot struck Tony in the leg. Lydia, who was near feet away, ran to the door, but she was blocked by Washington, who pulled out a gun and ordered her to the ground.
Lydia High takes the stand.
Lydia High never specifically identified Carl Jordan. What she claimed she witnessed was that the shooter was a light-skinned black male with a neck tattoo.
She described Jordan's appearance. A light-skinned male, she described his tattoo, and then in addition, she explained for the jury that she knew Washington, that she recognized him that night when he came through the door because she had grown up with him in her neighborhood.
Her fear in the courtroom was palpable. I think it was evident to anybody that was there and witnessed her testify the trauma that she went through and how difficult it was for her to have to go back through and relive those events.
With Lydia's testimony, prosecutors addressed the presence of the third man whose DNA was found at the scene. They allege Lydia unknowingly let him in.
She testified at this trial that she had no idea who this was. He must have come in while the door was open and she was walking in.
They sent this third person into the building so that he could go into the back and open the fire escape to let Washington and Jordan in.
Tony Rincon also takes the stand.
Tony testifies that he knows both Washington and Jordan and identifies them in the court that day. He states that he saw Jordan walk over to Jay as if he was going to give him a pound or a handshake. And that was around the same time his mother was calling. He said that he heard the shot, he looked up, and he saw Jay fall.
So Tony testified that the shooter and the other suspect ran out the fire escape after shooting Jay. And this verifies the information that detectives have that there was a third person who allowed access to that fire escape for our suspects.
Tony Rincon and Lydia High both testified that the reason they didn't initially identify Carl Jordan as the shooter was because they were scared. And after 15 years or 16 years or 18 years or 20 years, they decided now was the time. They were no longer scared and they were going to do the right thing.
Randy Allen also takes the stand, recalling a version of events that stays true to what he told police back in 2002.
Randy Allen ran from the control room, saw his best friend on the floor bleeding from the head, took the gun, ran out the back door, I believe, the fire escape door, looking for the shooter or shooters, and then ran to the parking lot, which was about a block away.
Without Lydia High, without Randy Allen, and without Tony Rincon, the case can fall apart. Yeah, you could have one of them testify or maybe even two, but having all three, they don't have to wonder what did Lydia see or what did Randy see or what did the other people hear. They can hear from their mouth exactly what happened.
But will it be enough?
Well, the strengths of the prosecution case were the eyewitnesses, but their strengths in this case were also their weaknesses, because I thought these eyewitnesses were incredible. Other weaknesses were there were no forensics, no fingerprints, no DNA, no nothing to connect Carl Jordan to the crime scene. No statements by Carl Jordan to really connect him to this. There were a lot of more weaknesses, I believe, than strengths. Well, sure. He came in through the front door. He left his hat and his DNA at the crime scene. He matched the description provided by Lydia High, first description she gave as the shooter being 6 feet 2 inches tall.
The day of the shooting, Lydia gave a description of the shooter being tall. The problem in this case is that Jordan is not tall, but this third person is a tall individual.
The defense theory was that this third person who came in through the front door with Lydia High and left his DNA at the scene was the shooter. He left forensics at the shooting.
The defense hones in on the changes in Tony and Lydia's statements over time.
Now on cross-examination, I was able to take their handwritten statements and use them in cross and say, you know, the day or 2 days after this happened, didn't you say this and didn't you say that and didn't you have a different recollection? When it happened than you do, you know, when you testified last month, 20 years later. That's why we called the memory expert.
The defense called one witness to the stand. It was a memory expert who called into question whether Tony Rincon or Lydia High could remember exactly what happened 20 years ago.
It seemed to us that it was worth raising in the jurors' minds the notion that memory may be sharper at the time of an incident than it would be some 20 years later. People's memories are fresher 20 years earlier. And not just fresher, but more reliable. Because as you retell the story over time, you add a piece here and you add a piece there and you continuously add, you know, and then you don't know, in your own mind, you don't know what actually happened.
We challenged the government's narrative by saying the evidence is insufficient to establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That's how we challenged it. The jury deliberated several days. I never know what to expect during deliberations. What I expect never happens, so I stopped trying to have these unreasonable expectations.
In February of 2024, the federal jury deliberates, and they come back and they find Washington and Jordan Jr. guilty of the murder of Jam Master Jay.
Ronald was stunned by the verdict, and he was very upset by it. Lost it, and he screamed out.
And there was an outburst that the judge addressed very quickly. and she had made efforts by admonishing the defendants and also members of the gallery, the prosecutors, the people that had come to watch, members of the press, that she wanted there to be respect for the verdict, no matter what it was.
The date for Ronald Washington and Carl Jordan's sentencing is still to be set. For Jay's family and friends, the closure is bittersweet.
I went through 20 some odd years of suffering without Jay. 20 plus. My family, me, my mom, my mother, my grandmother, and my uncle Marvin, they all died without knowing what happened to Jay. So I don't have any sympathy for Jordan or Washington.
I wish he was still alive because Run DMC was a global phenomenon, and their reach was important because as they were performing, as they were sharing their creativity with people, they were also producing the blueprint of what hip-hop is. Rapper, DJ, that connection, that symbiotic relationship is important. It's integral to the music. Hearing Jam Master Jay scratch a sound was akin to watching someone perform magic.
Jay was alive right now, he would probably be producing my 5th album for sure, and Run DMC would still be touring, and he'd probably be on the road with me, because I would still be touring. We'd be enjoying life. I mean, life was good before he died. It would be great if he was still here. Yeah.